Tonight we are going to continue to study about the fruit of the Spirit. We're down to, I guess it's down to our last one, self-control. And of course, as Paul says in Galatians 5, verse 23, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Peter described it this way when he talks about the Christian virtues in 2 Peter 1. He says, but also for this reason, given all diligent, add to your faith virtue, to virtue knowledge, to knowledge self-control, self-control perseverance, to perseverance godliness, and godliness brotherly kindness, and brotherly kindness love. When you think especially about the fruit of the Spirit, as we've said all through this study, these are not optional. These, we don't just pick them apart and say, I'm one of these, but I'm not one of the others. We either have the fruit of the Spirit, we either have the characteristics of God, or we don't. We need to work on these. And every one of these is a choice that we make to have. It's a choice that we love like we should. We're as kind as we should. We're as gentle. We're as meek. That way, all these tie together, we can have the peace that we're supposed to have. And self-control is no different than this. Self-control is about a choice that we make to choose to have this self-control. Proverbs describes it this way. Proverbs 25, verse 28, whoever has no rule over his own spirit is like a city broken down without walls. Now think about that, and I think this is an excellent description of what self-control is. You know, to fortify a city, what did they do? They walled it up. They protected it. They made sure this wall was protected so it could keep the enemy out. And what would happen if an enemy would go in and destroy that wall? What would happen to the city? Once it went down, the city went down, didn't it? You know, you think about the walls of Jericho, when they marched around it and God brought those walls down, the city was gone after that. You know, when we break down these walls, when we don't let these walls protect us, then we're vulnerable. We're vulnerable to Satan. That's what self-control is. Self-control is putting that wall up so Satan can't penetrate. It's like putting on that whole armor of God so Satan can't get to us. And it takes discipline to do that. I think that's a good way to describe self-control is discipline. Paul said this. He understood self-control. 1 Corinthians 9 and 27, but he said, I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. Paul knew what it meant to have discipline. And he says, I have to discipline my body. The body talks about this war that is raging between the spirit and the flesh especially. And he says, we've got to make sure that we're winning that battle, that we're putting to death these fleshly things. That's what Paul was talking about in Galatians 5 when he talked about the works of the flesh and he described those works of the flesh. And he says, but here is the fruit of the Spirit. Here is what we're supposed to be producing. So we put off these other things. So it's about winning that battle over that. It's about having that self-control. It's about putting up these walls so we can protect what is valuable and produce the fruit that we need to produce. And that is the fruit of the Spirit. Now, as we go through this, there's some areas in our lives that I think the Bible is clear to where we need to have discipline, that we need to have self-control. And the first of these is with the flesh. The flesh, we can't be mastered by anything. We have the tendency, I think, to become enslaved to things of this world. That it controls us instead of us controlling it. Can you think of things in the world that would do that? Can someone be addicted to television? Can they be addicted today? You know, well, I don't have it. I gave it to my wife. Our phones. Anybody addicted to their phones? Does anybody's phones control them now instead of them controlling it? You know, you think of things. That's right. Go ahead and hit your wife's husband. We know it's all true. Think about it. Does anybody leave their home without their phone? Do they go nuts if they don't have their phones around them? Do you drive all the way back home to get your phone if you forget it? I'd raise my hand to all that. You know, I'm just as crazy too. I use my phone's flashlight to go out looking for my phone because I thought I've lost it before. You know, that happens when you get old age, I guess. But and it'd be nice if that was a joke, but that wasn't a joke. That actually has happened more than once. But what happens is we're so used to this self-gratification. We're so used to this instant of things that we become so accustomed to it that we have no control sometimes when it comes to these things. And we've got to learn to discipline ourselves. We've got to discipline ourselves of the things that are around. Notice what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 6 and 12. He said, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. Paul is warning us that there's even good things in the world. There's permissible things in the world, but there's things that can be misused to the point that we are brought under its control. So it really doesn't matter if something is sinful, if something is questionable, even if something is permissible. It can become where we're under its control, can't we? So we've got to make sure that we understand that we're not letting something be our master, that we're submissive to something other than God. But there's things in this world that we can become subject to, that we can give in to, our desires and our pleasures and these things. As Paul says, even if they're lawful for me, it may not be right for me to do it because I can be brought under its control. And he said, I won't be brought under control of anything because we have to remain to where we're focusing and that we're under God's control. And how we do that is, it's called self-control, but how we control it, as we're going to get into, is by doing the will of God. And God, we're under His control. And God is that wall that separates us from Satan, that helps keep that away, Satan and all of his lures away from us. Again, the key point to practicing self-control toward godliness is that we can't allow anything in the world to bring us under its control. And the first one of these, of course, is sexual impurities. One area where self-control is demanded of us more and more, I think, in our society is when it comes to sexual things. Because there's such a push on TV or internet and ads and everything. I was disappointed the other day. We were watching something, or I had it on for the grandkids, and some ad come on, and I thought we were streaming, didn't have ads anymore. And it just, something would pop up, and you think, well, that wasn't appropriate. Why would that even be on something for kids? It's more and more and more this is being pushed. So more and more and more, we have to be more aware of what's out there and make sure that we are under control, that we are looking at these things to where we understand that it's being pushed toward us, and we need to be aware of that. Paul said in 1 Thessalonians 4, he says, "For this is the will of God, your sanctification, that you should abstain from sexual immorality, that each of you should know how to possess his own vessel in sanctification and honor, not in passion of lust, like the Gentiles who do not know God." Again, this is the will of God, and it's for each of us to remain pure before God, that we control our bodies and not burn in the passions of flesh. God put a desire in us, and He did put a sexual desire that's there. And it's natural, and it's supposed to be there. But there is an avenue for that. There is a place for that. That's where marriage comes in. And sexual immorality, when you look into the world, it's just being pushed on our children. It's being pushed on us. It's damaging to our kids. It's damaging to our marriages because there's no sanctity in it. There's no purity in it. It's either something bad or there's nothing wrong with it in any realm. And God has placed that in us for a reason, to be used in a place. As Paul talks about the marriage bed being undefiled, that's where this is supposed to take place. That's where these desires are fulfilled. But if you look in the world, it's just the opposite. If you look into the world, marriage is not sacred. Sexual purity is not sacred before marriage. None of these things are, because it's unpopular to the world. So kids are being brought up, or they're being taught to have no self-control when it comes to things like this. And as a parent, we've been doing a parenting class, and we've not got into this very extensively yet as we got into other things, but that's part of a parent's responsibility to make sure we're teaching these things, to make sure these children, the children understand it and are ready for marriage and understand one of the purposes of marriage. That's not being taught anymore. It's just like it's a free-for-all, that it becomes, they give in to peer pressure. I was reading an article, and it's amazing to me how young individuals start when it comes to sexual things. You used to think, well, how old do they have to be before you have the talk? How old do they have to be before you talk about purity and sex before marriage? And, maybe when they get older to a teenager, it's not at a teenager anymore. I couldn't imagine what children have to go through and the pressures that they face. I know the pressures they faced when I was younger. I can't imagine what they face now. And you think about when parents don't take their responsibility seriously of teaching self-control to their children, then they don't know it. They don't know to have it. Then what happens? It affects them in that moment, or affects them later in life emotionally, and the baggage that goes along with that's not taught at an early age. And it affects them later on. But self-control is a big part of that, especially when it comes to before marriage and marriage. And then what happens when individuals get married? They don't look at that as a sacred thing. So what happens is they feel like, well, my spouse is not fulfilling my needs, so I have to go somewhere else to fulfill my needs, and they have no self-control. So what happens is, what does it do? It destroys the marriage. So you see this this progression as it goes through in this society and world in which we live in, to where self-control is just pretty well just to the wayside. When it comes to marriage, we've got to make sure that we're teaching our young people, again, the sanctity of marriage and how important it is when it comes to things concerning the marriage. In 1 Corinthians 7:5, Paul says this about marriage. About husband and wife. Do not deprive one another except with consent for a time, that you may give yourselves to fasting and prayer and come together again, so that Satan does not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. I remember meeting with a couple one time, and the reason I remember it, because I'll never forget it, because it shocked me of what was said. One of the spouse committed adultery, so they came and they were talking to me about it. And the other spouse said, I withheld my obligations as a wife so they would go out and commit adultery so I could leave the marriage. And that just shocked me that was even coming out of their mouth. And so I just proceeded to tell the individual, you were wrong for committing adultery. You were wrong for not fulfilling your role as a spouse. Both of you have put your marriage asunder. You don't think about what the sanctity that God has placed upon that. But what happens in a marriage is when you have husband and wife not engaged in the marriage and living up to the choice that they made when it come to love, which was a choice, that you choose to love this person, you choose to love and treat this person in a certain way, you choose to come into that marriage bond, as God said, until death. But the individuals will get into a situation to where they will find their needs met somewhere else. They will talk to someone and tell someone intimate details. Someone was showing some attention that a spouse didn't show them. Then the next thing you know, then they violated the marriage. And then you think, well, how do you get to that place? Well, I think the same way that we teach our young people, don't ever put yourself in that situation. Don't ever put yourself in a situation where you can lose self-control. You take an alcoholic, they're not going to spend time at a bar. You take a drug addict, they're not going to go down to the back alleys and hang around drug addicts. You take someone, whatever the case may be, if you make a commitment, don't put yourself in a situation to where you're going to break that commitment. You think, well, that sounds pretty simple. I think it is. I don't understand how people do that, how they would put themselves in situations to where they would lose self-control. Now, we all war against the flesh. I'm not going to stand up here and say, well, nobody wars. Certain people can overcome that. And just don't put yourself in that situation. where you don't have a hard time to fight the battle. Does that make sense? You know, when it comes to self-control, it comes down to I've got to follow what God's will says to let Him win that battle for me when it comes to self-control. And again, the things of the flesh are part of this, but it's not the only part. Our minds are another part. In 2 Corinthians 10 and verse 5, casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. Notice, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. We're not only supposed to discipline our bodies, but we must also take control of our minds. The reason I think it's very simple. We think about in our minds is what we will practice in our lives. Look in James chapter 1. Isn't this what James tells us? But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desire and enticed. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, what? Brings forth death. Do you know what every action of where someone lost self-control, do you know where it started at? Where did it start? Does it start with the action? It never starts with the action. It starts right here. That's where it starts. That's where it has to be took care of. That's where it begins. If you make it to where it's not a process in your mind, it's not going to be an action. That's where people lose. Now notice again what James says. But each one is tempted. The tempting is not wrong. Our Lord was tempted, wouldn't He? You know, Satan tempted Him with the lust of the flesh, lust of the eye, and pride of life. Temptation is not the sin. Everyone is tempted in some form. But notice, it's when you are drawn away by your own desires and enticed. Now, it's when a person desires so much, you say, well, what are we talking about? Remember what Jesus said in Matthew? In Matthew chapter 25, beginning at verse 27, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has also committed adultery in her heart. Now, what was he talking about here? Well, it goes back to the same thing that James was talking about. It starts with this desire. Jesus says if you have this lust and continue to have this lust, it's not about a thought. It's not saying if you have a thought about a woman, you've committed adultery in your mind. Because think about this. When Satan tempted Jesus and he said, turn these stones into bread, did Jesus have to consider what Satan was saying when he turned him down? Think about it. He had to think, okay, I'm being tempted by turning this bread or these stones into bread. He had a thought about it. He didn't have a desire for it. He didn't lust for it. But he had to think about what was transpiring there to have a defense for it. Now, what do I mean by this? It's when it comes to lusting or when it comes to giving in to these desires, it's about thinking about it and thinking about it to where you end up putting yourself in a position to where it becomes an action. Jesus says, don't dwell on it. Don't lust after it. Don't let it be a continual thought in your mind, and you won't lose self-control. But it has to start in the mind. That's where we discipline ourselves. Don't put yourself in a situation. Don't put yourself in a situation to where you can even would be able to give in to that. And you say, well, I wouldn't anyway. Well, you may not think you will. So don't put yourself in the situation to where you would be tempted to. You know, it becomes a problem with people when it comes to marriage and these different things when you see in the world is because when we put, situations in our path to make it harder to be in the commitment that we made. That's why in every premarital class that I do, I always do the circle. Here's the circle. You, your spouse, and God is the only one in that circle. Nobody else gets in that circle. Your children don't get in that circle. Friends don't get in that circle. You don't share intimate details with some friend and all these things that you wouldn't share with your spouse, because once you get out of that circle and break that circle, where's the limit to it? There's something. It's like everything else. Once you open the door, where's the door stop? Just with a crack or wide open? Don't ever let the door open. Because that's the choice that you made, right? That's what James is talking about. He says when desire has conceived, when it conceives, then it gives birth to sin. And then when you let sin full grown, that brings forth death. So if you don't want death, you don't want sin to be full grown, you don't want it to become sin, you take care of it while it's in here. That's what Jesus was saying in Matthew chapter 5. But again, we live in a world of microwaves and self-gratification, and it's all about me, it's all about me. So if it's all about me, I'm going to do whatever feels good for me. I'm going to do whatever pleasures me. It's not about the other person. It's not about the commitment I made. It's not about the commitment I made to God. It's about me. We live in a society of me. And self-control has nothing to do with that. Because we act upon the things that we think about. But again, it goes farther than that. It's about what we think that leads into our emotions. What are we supposed to do? Well, Philippians chapter 4. In Philippians chapter 4, Paul says, "Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are noble, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there is any virtue, if there's anything praiseworthy," what? Meditate on these things. Now notice, the things he's talking about meditating upon, that can become my desire to want to think about. And if that's my desire to want to think about, guess what it's going to do? It's going to create those actions. And what actions is it going to create? The fruit of the Spirit that we're trying to produce: love, kindness, gentleness, self-control, to have the peace that if we practice these things, wouldn't we have the peace that God wants us to have? Think about how peace we would be in our marriages, how peace we would be in our whole families, how much peace we would have in our congregation if we were producing the fruit in which God wants us to produce. But it has to start on the inside. We have to be in control of what we're thinking and be in control of the emotions that we have. Self-control of the mind is not simply to refusing to dwell upon bad things. It's making the choice to dwell upon good things. See, just like the works of the flesh, Paul says, put off these works of the flesh. I'm choosing not to do those things, and I'm choosing to do the fruit of the Spirit. That's what I want to produce. So how I do that? I do that by choosing what I think about. And I tell you, this isn't easy. Controlling the mind is a difficult thing. When it comes to what we do, it comes to our emotions, because we can get in a bad place in our head, can't we? And that controls our emotions, that controls our actions. And I'm not talking about just works of the flesh when it comes to the sexual purity and these things. I'm talking about of our emotions, of anger, bitterness, self-pity, these types of things. We lose control of that if we don't control our minds, which leads to, of course, us controlling our emotions. In Proverbs 16:32, he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city. You know what Solomon's saying here? It takes more might to control yourself than it does to overtake a city. He said, this is how good a person you'll be. Notice, he's slow to anger is better than the mighty. You're stronger than that person that can overtake a city if you can control what's in here. So you think that takes some effort? Think that takes some planning? Think that takes some decision making? I think that's what we ought to be teaching our children. Think about what you're doing. Think about what the effect of that's going to be. Think about what this decision here is going to do. Now, we can't plan out our whole lives, but I can think about the decisions I make and what those consequences or rewards might be. God asks us to do that and even commands us to do that all the time. Count the cost, right? I've got to count the cost of being a Christian. What is it like? What am I giving up? What's my reward going to be? And that's why it's so hard for us as Christians, because we're used to self-gratification and we want it right now, and the reward we're ultimately waiting for, we've not achieved yet. Paul said, I'm still pressing forward to that goal. I've not yet obtained it yet. So sometimes it gets out of our thinking, doesn't it? And because it gets out of our thinking, then we go back into thinking about carnal things and worldly things. Because the reward we're wanting is still far off, right? So we need to be teaching our children, think about the decisions that you make. It used to kill me. You've heard me say it before. It used to kill me when my mom, every time I get grounded for being late or doing this, and I'd always say, but you don't understand, this happened or this happened. Well, you made the decision to get in this car. You made the decision to go to this place. When you did that, you may have put it out of your control, but you made the choice to put it out of your control. Thus, it's still your fault. So how do you argue with that? You may want to argue, but it's true. And that's the same thing with us, how we live our lives. That's what God is telling us. You make the choice of whether this becomes out of your control or not. You're giving somebody else the power. Keep it within your power. Keep it within your decision. And how you do that is make the decision before you get into the situation, and maybe you won't even get in the situation. Make it before you do. I don't know about you. Have you ever made a reactive decision and it been a right decision? Make a decision in the emotion of it? Whether it's anger, whether it's whatever it is. Have you ever made a decision in the middle of that was what it should be? Said the right thing or did the right thing? That's where self-control comes in. We have to control our actions, control our emotions. And again, it's easy for me to stand up here and say it. It's a lot different when you walk out in the world and have to do it, isn't it? But it comes down to, I'm in control of me. And what I have to decide is, am I going to let God control what I do? Or am I going to let the world control what I do? I have to make that decision. So I need God to instruct me on how to get through this world and produce the fruit that I'm supposed to produce and have the self-control in doing that. Because that's part of the fruit. And that again is considering my emotions, considering what my focus is. And it comes down to controlling myself to where I want to do the right things. Again, never act on our emotions, and that would cause me to start developing some sound judgment, wouldn't it? Because our judgment can get off. Because we start judging things based on how I feel. And I react, and that's what the world wants you to do. I react because this is how I feel. I'm angry because I feel angry, so I act angry. I'm bitter, so I act bitter because that's how I feel. Whatever it is, we can go down the line with anything we want to put in front of it, and it's because I'm letting those things guide me instead of God's Word guide me. Instead of being instructed, I'm being tossed to and fro, as James says. But it comes down to, if I want to have sound judgment, I've got to practice these things to have it. They're not just going to happen overnight, because we may have to undo the teaching that we've had all our life. Just say this about parents, and myself included. Children may have to undo what they learned from their parents when it comes to these things, because they act upon what they've been taught or what they see. So if I'm a reactive person, then I've taught my children to be reactive people. So I may have to break that cycle, and it may take work to do that. But I do right. I feel right because I'm doing right. I don't do right because I feel right. And you can't say, well, let your conscience be your guide, because my conscience may not have been taught the right way. So I have to train myself to be taught in the way of God, to be able to practice self-control the way God says to practice self-control, and to discipline myself when it comes to it. So how do I do that? I come under God's control, because that's what I was doing. If I'm practicing the works of the flesh, then Satan is controlling me. And if I turn and put off those works of the flesh, I've turned, and now I'm going toward good, producing good things, so I'm under the control of God. So I have to know what God wants me to do. What does God want me to do in this situation? And that takes out the emotion part of it. Okay, today I'm going to make sure, as I said before, not to put myself in situations that I may lose self-control in some areas. So have a conscious thought not to do that. And this isn't, when it comes to all of these things, it's not an easy thing to do. It's a conscious thing that we do. You know, when you get married, you make a conscious effort. Okay, I'm going to, out of the right thing to do and out of respect for my spouse, I'm never going to put myself in these situations. As I'm going through life, especially again out of respect for God and as a Christian and them seeing God in me, I'm not going to put myself in these situations to say this or to do that. That takes self-control. What does that mean? That means I'm disciplining my body. I'm keeping my emotions, I'm keeping my actions under control. And that goes against the grain of the world. The world may think this is foolish. The world may think this is silly. You ever been reprimanded or someone make fun because you've made a conscious, self-controlled decision? You ever done that? I can remember several times. I remember one time in particular at church, a lady wanted to talk to me one time, so we were walking in the office, and as we did, she just shut the door behind me. I just got up from the desk, went and opened the door, went and sat back down, did this twice. And she got mad and left, got mad at me because I wouldn't talk to her with the door open. I said, well, I can close the door, but I'm going to bring my wife in here. Wouldn't do it. She said, I don't want to talk to your wife. I want to talk to you. Well, then you can't by yourself. It doesn't work that way. I mean, even sometimes in the church, people think that's crazy and silly. But, you know, you've got to make a conscious effort that I'm not going to do this in certain... And that doesn't make me some great guy. And, I lose self-control in a lot of areas. But you have to make conscious choices to get better and better in situations to where you can keep the commitment that you made to God. Again, these things are a commitment. You know, it's a choice that I make. I'm going to do this so I can produce the fruit that I'm supposed to produce. Because I'm going to reap what I sow. I'm going to harvest the things that I've planted. And what have I planted? What fruit is there? Well, it's going to become evident what's there of what we are. Any thoughts or comments thus far? I've kind of rattled on here on the soapbox. Right.
All right. With kids, sometimes you take the time to explain. Sometimes you explain with brute force. With Ty, sometimes brute force wasn't going to work. So I use manipulation and saying, all right, this one you're going to get for free. But the second time, you're going to remember for the rest of your life when I get done punishing you. So it was like,
Sounds like good parenting to me, but yeah. Yeah.
But if you hit them in the heart, it can redirect them.
Yeah. Well, and it's like everything else, and this, especially when it comes to certain things, it's uncomfortable to talk to your children about it and try to teach them before they get themselves in situations. But it does come down to the things that we do, even when it comes to discipline, it comes to punishment. We put the right amount of pressure on so later on they don't have too much and can't handle it, and they won't know what to do. And it comes down to even something simple as, well, why can't I have the cookie, when they're younger? Well, because you're about to eat dinner, and you can't have the cookie because that's going to spoil your dinner, or you don't need this at this particular time. Now, this don't apply to grandparents if kids ask for cookies. This is just for parents, but no. But, I mean, seriously, it comes down to that. Why? To have them to understand, okay, there's nothing wrong with wanting a cookie, but there's a reason to wait for that cookie, There's a reason to wait for that, and cookie's fine in its proper place and its proper amount. And that sounds like something simple, but that's what we're talking about, isn't it? That's what we're trying to teach ourselves, and that's what we need to be teaching our children. Okay, you have this, you have this desire to want to do this or please yourself as far as your emotions and your feelings. And all these things are natural. You have these desires that were within you, to have. And sometimes you're going to have some outbursts of wrath. You're going to have some outbursts of these feelings. You're going to have all these, but you've got to learn to have them under control. And here's how you do it. It starts with these simple things. But if it comes down to, as kids are today, I guess, we give them everything they want, and there's no reason to hold back on anything, then there's no self-control that's there. And that's the same way as Christians. God has got us under self-control and teaching us, wait, here's the reward that you're wanting. Here's the sacrifice that you make to receive that reward. It's natural to want that reward. It's natural to want to receive that reward, but there's sacrifices that have to be made to do that, and there's consequences if you don't. You're going to remember. You're going to remember this if you don't. This is why. There's consequences for your actions that may be immediate consequences, and they may be a lifetime consequence. We need to make sure we're teaching that so they can understand that and know, because as parents especially, we're teaching them to make the right choices. I can't make the choices for them as they grow up, but we have to teach them to make the right choices. That's our responsibility. Now, whether done that or not, I don't know. I guess time will tell as parents. But that's what God does for us. He gives us the instructions. He gives us, here's the reward for following those instructions. Here's the consequences for following those. Some of those consequences are immediate. Some of them last a lifetime, and some of them will last an eternity. Just like rewards. Some rewards are immediate. Some rewards will last a lifetime, and some will be for eternity. We choose what we're going to do, what we're going to control ourselves. Am I willing to sacrifice now for the reward then, or do I want, as Jesus said, if you want the praises of men now, that's what you're going to get. You won't get the praises of God then. If that's what we're striving for, that's the same thing we're talking about here. It's about what gratification we're wanting. Do we want fleshly gratification, the carnal, the worldly, or do we want the spiritual? If I want the worldly, I can have it with all its glory for the moment, but I get the consequences that come with it. If I want the eternal, well, there's sacrifices here and things that I have to wait for, but I will get it one day with all its glory. As Paul said, I discipline my body now because I'm still pressing toward the goal. I'm still wanting the reward. I've not yet received the reward. Don't give up. It's a race. Don't fall out of the race. It's not a sprint. We're still trugging along. But it takes controlling our mind, our hearts inside, or the intellect, so we can control what those actions are, good or bad. I have to be self-controlled in wanting to do good, just like self-control in not wanting to do bad. It's bringing these things under subjection. Any other final thoughts? Self-control in the world that we live in is not an easy thing to do. As Paul said in Romans 7:23, when he talks about this wage of war in the mind, he said, "But I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind, and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin, which is in my members." What we have to realize is God has given us all the defenses we need and telling us this is what you're battling against. And it's our responsibility as Christians to follow that, and it's our responsibility as Christian parents to teach that to our children. It's nothing, it's awful, especially I've talked to families that husband and wives has got them in different situations, and you talk to them, and what's devastating about it is, well, I've never been taught that. I didn't know that. If I'd known that, I'd been more prepared for that. Or maybe I'd thought different about that. And so maybe it's our responsibility to make sure that's what we're teaching. So I hope you think, once again, just with self-control like these other ones, that it's all part of the whole. If we put all of these together, do our best to strive to produce this fruit, there will be rewards when it comes harvest time.